What is up, my ninjas? I'm Strident, and I am coming to you today with a different video. This time we are looking at the world of Masters of the Universe classics. This is something I had been planning on doing for a long time because I am a He-Man fan. Not so much the old school He-Man, even though, you know, there's kind of a little place in my geek heart for that, but I prefer the Mike Young Productions version, or the 2002 series, whatever you want to, call it. The original one, I mean, like it, hate it, love it, whatever. It was so kind of wishy-washy and non-violent, and even though it had good story elements that if they kind of added to it, it would be better. They kind of, I mean, for the time it worked because we were little kids, but as an adult going back and watching it, it's just poorly done. um, and I know a lot of people might not agree with me, but whatever. I mean, shit like He-Man, it's just like Ninja Turtles later on, where they carry their weapons but never really use them. Characters doing things that just didn't make sense. It didn't really work for me when the 2002 series started. Literally every issue that I had with the old school cartoon was fixed. You know, all the characters showed up and they actually did really cool stuff. It wasn't just I was remembering the way they look and letting my mind fill in the gaps to make them cool. They actually were cool. They did cool stuff. They had cool plots. They redesigned characters in a way that actually felt more like what they should have been in the first place. It just was a really good cartoon, and it answered a lot of things that to me were left unanswered. I don't remember a King Grayskull from the original, but there had to be a King Grayskull because there's a Castle Grayskull. So who was he? The Mike Young Productions series gave us King Grayskull, and they used him as a way to tie into the new design and new style of He-Man and whatnot. Now, I'm going to kind of go over a little bit about that with him and Battle Lion. Battle Lion shares the same body and basic construction of the other two mounts, Battle Cat and Panther. And he has the same kind of pieces, with the exception of the claw covers or gloves or gauntlets that you can put on his claws. His armor is actually completely different from the classic Battle Cat. It actually kind of, in a way, negates the classic Battle Cat armor, because in the 2002 series there was no classic Battle Cat. Just like He-Man didn't have the iron claw or iron cross on his chest and didn't look like this. Instead, Battle Cat would have all the gear, like I previously mentioned, from Battle Lion, which further ties him into the mythos of He-Man and Battle Cat and Castle Grayskull, which is awesome. The cross on He-Man's chest was different. All these little details about the two of them were different and kind of, I don't want to say modernized, but updated and a little bit more functional and a little bit more hardcore. Now, a thing to keep in mind with the Masters of the Universe as a toy line, and with the classics as a kind of a reinvigoration, reimagining of the toy line, is that even back in the day, Masters of the Universe covered or was made up of three separate components. I'm sorry for the background noise. I'm opening up an old DVD I didn't even realize I didn't open. But it's made up of three components. You have the cartoon, you have the action figures, and you have the mini comics. All three following almost their own continuity. There are things that show up in the mini comics that at the time did not show up in toy form. There's things that are in the toys that weren't in the show, and same thing with the comics. There's things that are in the comics that weren't in either of the other two. So they were kind of doing triple duty. So, characters like King Grayskull, there's probably mentions of different origins for Castle Grayskull, but as far as I know, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, they never really depicted a King Grayskull. So you had a Castle Grayskull, but you didn't know who was the king during the time that the castle was actually in use. The Mike Young Productions series, which I am like 1,000% a fan of, goes into detail about this and helps give you an idea of who he is. when it comes to the representation of this character in toy form, I have one gripe, and that's the scale. In the show, he was huge, and so was Battle Line. I'm talking like they were easily two of the biggest things out there on the battlefield. And I wish that the figures kind of followed suit. You know, make them bigger than the He-Man figures, bigger, the standard He-Man figures, and make Battle Lion bigger than Battle Cat. But as it stands, I can deal with what we ended up with. It's not that bad. When I was a kid, though, I always wanted Battle Cat because I had Battle Armor He-Man. With the chest piece that you tap and it had the different battle damage scars or dents or whatever. But I never had a Battle Cat. And, part of the reason why I never really was big on actually hunting him down is I never liked this mask. The most of the mask is cool, and I admit it'd be terrifying in battle, but the big-ass schnoz on it, it always bothered me. It always just looked out of place. But it's cool that you have this for the Classics fans, and then you have the Battle Lion helmet, which is removable for the 2000X fans, which I think it's dope that they went that route. You know what I mean? It helps give us variety. This is one of the strengths of the Masters of the Universe Classics line in general, is there's so much variety, and they cover everything. They cover all three eras, actually four if you count some of the characters that showed up in the comics later on, the newer comics, but they cover all that stuff, so all the fans are taken care of no matter what era it is. And some stuff works better, some classic stuff works better with the newer 2000X stuff, and some doesn't, you know what I mean? So it's dope to have that. Now, King Grayskull, design-wise, is just the 2002 He-Man with different hair, a cape, and a longer loincloth. That's it. And the face is a little bit different. This figure does a really good job. That body type, the standard body type, does a really good job of capturing kind of, the essence of what this character should be like. And, for people like me, who the last He-Man figures I had were the 2002 ones, it's nice to see all the little updates and all the articulation brought back in this figure. Here you see him compared to Battle Cat, and you can see all the little similarities from the horn on their heads up to the front piece, like the little nose cone piece. There's like a pointy piece that hangs down right in between the two fangs. It's on the big nose piece for, old school Battle Cat, but it's, a little bit streamlined for the Battle Lion. But, needless to say, him and Hordak, Battle Lion, King Greyskull, and Hordak were three of the figures I was so excited for because I always wanted them. And after getting the entire series, I bought the entire series twice for the 2002 series. I bought a bootleg when it first aired at Comic-Con like years ago. Like I think it was in like 2004 or 5 or something like that, or 2006. And then I bought the official release. I was just ecstatic. And now that I have them, you can see from Akiba Red, I'm just 1000% happy. They did everything I wanted with them, and I'm so happy to see them. As for King Greyskull as a character, Greyskull was a very just king who had a very specific function. He had to deal with Hordak and the Evil Horde, and he had to defeat them. He had to find, he lost his power sword in battle, had to find it, regain his resolve, drive them out, but at the cost of his life. Before he dies, he puts his power into the sword, and then asks the elders, during all this, to guard it, and the sorceress to guard it for him. And then every hero that wields his sword after this would call upon his name and gain his power. It's awesome and it's dope and it makes perfect sense. Similar to what I chose to do with Strident the First and Strident the Second. You find the sword, you are chosen, you carry on the legacy, and you take on his name, essentially. I think it's an awesome device. I am big on coming up with, substituting and coming up with my own versions of some of these characters when they're not released or when they're out of my reach, monetarily speaking, and the Sorceress was one of them. At the time when I was collecting the 2002 figures, they had never released, and I don't think they ever did, even up until the series died, they never actually released an action figure of the Sorceress from the 2002 series. And NECA did like these Staction figures in the Horseman style, and I think they might have even been sculpted by the Horsemen. I don't know, but they look just like the 2002 figures, but they have like hair and like real hair and soft goods capes and things like that. And they did a sorceress, but she's pretty expensive when you're looking for her on eBay. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to substitute. So I took this McFarlane Valkyrie figure, and I saw she had the Iron Cross on there, and I was like, holy shit, I am going to use her as my sorceress. In the series, the sorceress is the wife of King Devon of Greyskull, who is, I think that was his name, Devon of Greyskull. And it was pretty cool that they did that with her. So it gives her some history and some connection to this whole big thing, other than her just being some chick that's in the castle, you know? I like this design. I know this isn't really, you know, obviously it's not canon, but they're barbarians, and there's like, you know, Vikings, and they're all blonde, and it's like so I figured, you know, this fits. This works better. This feels more along the lines of what she probably should look like, and not that weird Egyptian white woman hybrid thing. I mean, the Filmation one works too, but to me, she lacks detail. I still want it, don't get me wrong, because it's classic and it's a good design, but it kind of doesn't work for me in the same way that this does. So, you know, that's my sorceress. Here are the three, you know, He-Man, I'm sorry, Adam, He-Man, and or Greyskull and He-Man, so you can see how they look side by side, and you can see the difference, the complete difference in sculpt because of the articulation of the newer figures. King Grayskull can stand up straight, whereas the other two can't. But needless to say, I still use them in my, you know, setups and when I play and stuff like that. And, you know, it's pretty cool to see all that together and see it finally realized. Adam in the series was having dreams about King Grayskull's last moments, you know, and you find out that it's a memory because he is, you know, a descendant of King Grayskull. As you can see with the chest, you see the emblems. It's not the Iron Cross. It's a different kind of symbol, almost an H with a cross going through it. It's pretty dope. You know, I like that update. But I came up with a way to incorporate the Iron Cross in my King Grayskull figure so that it represents how I got into the series. You know what I mean? Because I like to create history with my figures, and, you know, it's fun when you do these things. You know, it just makes it more memorable for you. So anyway, here she is. Here's the sorceress with, I used Odin's staff. I wanted to see what it looked like in an image. So don't bite my head off because it's a huge staff. It looks all right. But, you know, I might use something else to, I don't know. I might use something else to just, you know, be the staff. It's just hard to find the right kind of staff for this sort of thing. I'll look on eBay and find more stuff, you know, more Masters related stuff and use that as a staff. You never know. But she essentially, for now, actually, she will be posed or, you know, on my shelf with this staff because I don't really have any plans of making Odin. I just, you know, I'm not interested in the majority of the figures. I got the two that I was actually looking for, and that's as far as it's going to go with me. But anyway, back to what we were all gathered here for, and that's more talk about King Grayskull and, you know, Masters Universe Classics. Another thing I dig about the Classics, though, is that the designs are so out there that you could collect certain characters that all have a fairly similar aesthetic, put them together, and your own little, you know, Motu universe starts to come alive because you found like a shtick that works for you. And, you know, that's one of the things that I like the best about this. You know, like Adam is a young prince who is learning how to be this great hero through his usage of the power sword and the He-Man powers. I think that's dope. Having him be small is pretty cool, and then having him grow up to be this huge He-Man is cool. It's like a Shazam kind of deal. Here's all the He-Man figures that I have, like the He-Man related specific figures. Now, what I do deals with these two figures, and a lot of collectors of the Motu Classics do that. This is the Toys R Us Superman He-Man 2-pack He-Man figure. You can tell by he has the gold bands. And you know the King Grayskull, that's the single carded release. I got him loose at Big Fun. This here is Snake Armor He-Man. This came out last month. I paid an arm and a leg with him. He came in a 2-pack with King Hiss, the 2000 X2 King Hiss. Now that head, it's the classic head. As you can see, the hair mimics the figure. I shouldn't say classic, but the updated 2002 head. And he has the hair and everything. And if you look at the symbols on this He-Man's chest and King Grayskull, you can see they're similar. Obviously, there's a difference in detail because the 2002 figures were like full of detail, like surpassing the classics in a lot of ways. But all you need to do is swap the heads of the 2-pack with take that head off and put King Grayskull's head on. And for me, it works because the first He-Man I had, he wore the cross, the Iron Cross. It's kind of cool because it's history for me. And since the Filmation version is the old version, it makes more sense for King Grayskull, since he represents the old back in the day. He can wear the old cross, the classic cross, and you know, kind of have the old color scheme, you know, old He-Man color scheme. The skin tones kind of match for the most part. And then you can do some things to update your new school He-Man, which would use this head from Snake Armor He-Man, which I'm pretty sure this is it's got to be the reason why they even made, the main reason why they made this figure like this. And they do a lot of this with the head swapping over and over. That's why they make it fairly easy. But you put this head on this body, you can see kind of side by side with the other one that there's so many similarities. I've already shown you the majority of the similarities that they have. The main thing just being the updated crest on his chest, and you end up with your updated 2002, you know, He-Man. So for me, that's my basic He-Man. I never was like huge on the old show. The old show was too non-violent for me. The characters, a lot of them, you know, it was all that homoerotic craziness that as a kid, all I wanted to see was the kids, or see the characters with swords fight and shoot. And, you know, I wanted to see cool adventure stuff. I didn't really want to see all those weird situations where, you know, as kids, we didn't understand what was going on. But here you get a good example of what's going on with the detail of these characters and how similar they are. Right from the, you know, the brown boots to the freaking power sword. It's just an updated version of the figure with proper articulation. He's bigger, actually, which is kind of cool. You know, for a while, I just used the 2002 He-Man as the modern He-Man, and King Grayskull was the back in the day King Grayskull, and because he was so much larger, it kind of fit, you know, the scale that I'm talking about. You know, you can also do this so that in your, you know, your classics collection, you have a proper representation of the 2002 standard He-Man. I never liked the whole page boy thing. I always thought that haircut was just like, it was super weird. For some reason it works on Conan, I guess because his is wild and it's long, but it doesn't necessarily, to me, it doesn't look so cool on He-Man. It just looked, I don't know, just fruity. It didn't look as you know, hardcore and macho as, you know, everything else about some of these characters. And I mean, a lot of them aren't really macho, but they could be with tweaks, you know. But as you can see, there are still some things that are different, like the harness. I even tried to swap the harnesses, but they don't actually fit properly. But you see those 6 squares on the shoulder part? You don't have that on the modern one. You also don't have all the detail in the background behind the new symbol. Even the way that it connects, you see those little connector metal pieces and the like border around the actual crest itself. You don't have any of that on the classics figures. And the classics figures cost like twice what the 2002 figure cost. Even now when you buy them on eBay, same thing, even with all that detail lacking. So, you know, be aware of that. If you're a customizer, you probably could figure out a way to get the harness to fit on the newer, bigger Masters figures. My biggest complaint is I miss this pouch and belt combination because it really feels like the time, you know. I wish that I could somehow transfer those two. I'm not that good with that kind of stuff, and I don't want to break these figures. They cost way too much for me to be taking them apart and all that stuff, so I just leave them as is. Um, you can see the difference in the belts. It's just simple and kind of boring, but it's classic, so it works. But I think this look for your King Greyskull, along with the two older swords. When I got him loose, he came with the sparkly gray sword that turns into kind of like the transparent crystal blue color. I didn't end up with, all the individual parts with the two halves of the power sword and all that craziness. I didn't get down with that. I didn't even really realize that when I was a kid, that was the story, because like I said, we had the mini comics. I got those figures when I was really little. I think by the time I actually was like really reading and understanding what all that stuff was saying, those comics were destroyed. So that went over my head. I just was like, man, two halves of the same sword just seems dumb. Like, how about, you have a power sword and you have something else, or you have the sword that Skeletor came with in the 2002 series, and I think they redid it for the classics, that splits. Have that be the fancy something or other. You know what I mean? The two halves, the purple half and the gray, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I know a lot of fans will be like, blasphemy again, but like I said, in my universe, no. I'd rather have two separate swords and just you put them together and you cross them, or if the wheel, the person has like ultimate power, something, and they could be part of a whole different prophecy or something like that, or like, the MacGuffin of the week or something, because they still don't really make that much sense in the overall, at least to me, in the overall Masters continuity. So this look and having the two kind of magical powered up versions of the power sword, it works for me. It looks cool, especially just having him on display. I know the He-Man has one separate one and She-Ra has a different one. But since we have the newer power sword, that can have its own thing being tied directly to King Grayskull, and maybe these could be, weapons he used before making that, power sword, the new power sword. So I don't know. That's all going too much into, crazy individual detail, but I still like how this looks. It's just all classic, and it works. Um, I just have him on display, kind of like this, and then have all the other He-Man related guys around him, and like he's the centerpiece of that part. So this is kind of the way I like to have him. Now I know this and the regular Grayskull figure have those jacked up ankles, so sometimes posing him is a pain in the ass because he'll lean forward and fuck up everything else that's going on. But you work with what you got. He still looks cool with Battle Lion. Another cool thing is because the loincloth isn't so long, it doesn't get in the way when you sit him down. They put a little like hole or like a recess that you can put that part of the loincloth in when you sit him down. But with it being short, now he can actually lean forward naturally and not look so weird. Another thing, in the actual episode, he was shown wearing the snake armor. So, or it's funny they call it snake armor, but it's like anti-snake armor. But whatever, it's the what snake armor He-Man is wearing used to be armor that King Grayskull wore. So you can easily swap those heads, and you can pull that off too. Um, this looks super badass because look at all this detail that's on this figure. I mean, that's probably my favorite figure so far in the line, period. It's my second favorite He-Man. I mean, obviously you got to have a more classic, less armored up He-Man, but that right there, detail-wise, and I'm going to do a review of Snake Armor He-Man soon, but that right there is just gold. It's just proper. The two look perfect together, and I love that it's a modern design that kind of takes, it's found its place in the history of, the Masters of the Universe all together, which is pretty dope, because how often does that happen? Someone comes afterwards and then retells the history from the beginning and then solidifies new designs in the old portion of the history of the characters. That hardly ever happens. But it just looks cool. It looks like an update, when you pull this off with the head swap and, weapon swap also. It just works. I have no issues with it. I love how it looks. I love the fact that you're kind of, in my case, it's a throwback to the period, you know. Old He-Man for me when I was a kid looked like this. So if we're saying King Grayskull is the original He-Man, then that's how I'll display him, you know what I mean? And then since I love the 2002, and that's when I the 2002 reinvigorated my interest in Masters of the Universe, the newer He-Man should look like that He-Man. So there's my logic. You know, and it's also a great thing that you have the freedom to do this, you know. All this is so weird seeing it here and not seeing this kind of thought process go into, DC UCs. Shit, just the other day, I did this, you know, for a King He-Man custom, and I was like, wow, that actually could work because King He-Man has that washed out blonde hair, and, you know, I don't know if he has a patch, I can't remember, but it could work. But this Grayskull and Battle Lion is just a cool, you know, setup. I wish they were sold together, you know, like as some kind of 2-pack with him on Battle Lion. But, you know, if they're not, it's not a huge deal because you can still get them for decent prices. These figures do run a lot more than your run-of-the-mill DC UCs, and to some degree I see why, because there's a lot going on these figures. I mean, a lot of them come with a decent amount of accessories, and sometimes they come with accessories that go to other characters, which is, you know, a huge plus if you are definitely, what's the word I want to use? You're definitely kind of invested in this line. Like, you definitely are going to go through and collect as much as you can collect, you know? For me, I have very specific things I want to get, and then I'm done. Because I find that supplementing certain characters or the style of certain characters with figures from other lines, it works for me. And since I have like a swords and sorcery, you know, swords and sandals kind of setup, I can, it doesn't matter if they're all one thing or not, because it's a generalized thing. I mean, I've got Lord of the Rings shit mixed up in there. I mean, it's one portion of that world, quote unquote. I've got Dante's Inferno shit going on over there. I've got, you know, my Assassin's Creed stuff. I've got Final Fantasy stuff. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff mixed up, but it all kind of has similar aesthetics. So it looks cool when you see those couple shelves. Same thing with the villains. There's a lot of Snake-themed McFarlane figures that look more hardcore than the Snake-themed ones for Masters of the Universe. Same thing with the 2000X stuff versus the classic stuff. Like, Cobra Khan was small and kind of lithe. He wasn't extremely muscular and buff like all these guys. And I know that's the aesthetic. I know that's what the fans wanted. But for me, you know me, I like scale and I like different bodies and different molds and sculpts and all that. So I have the 2000X Cobra Khan, and I have him with, King Hiss. And it looks right because he's so much smaller. Now, if I had the classics version, they'd all be head to head, neck and neck, shoulder to shoulder. That's not what I saw on the show. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, there's some ways that this line cops out, but it's copping out in a nostalgia-like fashion because the original series had everyone with the exception of a handful of figures based on the same buck. And that's why they can get away with that now, because they're emulating that only with, you know, more articulation and updated sculpts. But these characters are pretty cool characters to get. I kind of feel like you have to get the Lion if you get King Grayskull. If you were a fan of the 2002 series, then there's no reason why you shouldn't have this, especially if you're an action figure collector, other than price. So, you know, if you see them, pick them up. Those two, they're worth it. They're fun. You'll be playing with them for hours and hours. And I mean, what's not to like about a giant lion as a mount for a badass, you know, barbarian hero? I mean, there's nothing not to like. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm Strident. Thank you for watching. This has been my overview of the Masters Universe Classics, King Grayskull, and Battle Lion, and several other things thrown in from my universe, but mostly these guys. And I hope you guys dug it. So I will be back with a couple more videos, and peace outside.